Now today I will be covering integrated dynamics, integrated tunnels, and integrated terminals. And I will try my best to explain how these mods work together to create a streamlined and efficient item management system for your modded Minecraft world. And this video is brought to you in dark mode. Now, if you're currently watching this series and you do enjoy videos like these, be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already, and well, of course, give this video a thumbs up. And then also don't forget, if I do mess up anything or there's some awesome information that you think I might have missed, be sure to comment that down in the comment section below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about how you actually get started in this mod. Now, one of the first things you're going to need to locate is a mineral tree, and mineral trees are typically found in a Miniglin biome, and you can find them kind of sprawled out throughout your world. But when you go to break this log, you're going to notice that not all of the logs, even if you're using Ore Excavator, will break. You'll actually encounter a couple of enriched logs in this tree, which is really nice. These enriched logs will typically drop a mineral chunk, which is going to be integral to this mod. Now, some other things that this will drop is also some berries, and these berries are a nice little food source that give you a burst of night vision. Now, the trees are not going to be the best source of getting yourself mineralized chunks. What you're really going to want to do is immediately make yourself a squeezer, and then you're going to want to make yourself a basin. And notice this line that is down the middle of this block. You want to place your drying basin in line on either side, corresponding to where that block is going to be placed. Because what we're going to do at this point is we are going to place a log in here, and then we are going to jump on this said log. And over a given period of time, after you've jumped enough, and it has recognized that you have jumped, it is then going to squeeze the fluid out of this squeezer. And of course, this squeezer has many other uses, but the main thing is that we are going to be generating some mineral in here. And as you can see right here, we now have ourselves a mineral block, and this contains 9 of these crystallized mineral chunks. Now, after the first initial press, you have to give this a redstone signal for it to pop back into position. And yes, this can be automated. And for a simple solution to automating this, you can simply use a redstone clock to make sure this gets a redstone signal that is pulsing, and 2 armor stands stacked on top of each other. And when placed down, this will eventually reset, allowing the 2 armor stands to bounce on top of the squeezer. And then we can simply add our logs from this mod into here to be squeezed. And this will of course work with anything that needs to be squeezed. And so with a hopper down here, we should be able to automate these blocks. But there is a better way to actually do this, and that is to upgrade to a mechanical squeezer and a mechanical drying basin. You can power these with integrated dynamics generators by using the mineral that you gathered from the initial automation. And this is going to build up and works exactly the same. However, this will have an option to auto eject the fluids over into the drying basin. So if enabled, this will automatically send this over here to be processed. So now with the basics out of the way and how you actually get started with the mod, we can now start to dive into some of the more complex aspects of the mod and start to utilize some of its features. Now, in taking a look at base integrated dynamics and without looking at the integrated tunnels mod, this mod, believe it or not, has some very interesting properties. It has the ability to read a lot of information through all of its different readers, and then in return, you can set up a program that can essentially write redstone depending on the variables that are associated to the readers. Now, I do want to show a basic example of this, and this might get a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try my best to explain it in the simplest way possible. Now, in this example, I have a block of cobblestone that is attached to a block reader. And then we have our network cable, and that can extend as far as you want. And then it is connected to a redstone writer. Something to note, these look like hoppers. So the hopper in this shape right here looks like it can take in information. And then this is formed like a hopper that is sending things. So if you want to look at it from that perspective, of course, the block shapes are that way for a reason. Now, some of the core functions of integrated dynamics is going to utilize variable cards. It's also going to utilize variable stores, and then you're going to also be using logic programmers. Now, logic programmers sort of stand on their own and are actually how you create the logic for example, what we're going to be working on here. Now, to explain what I'm trying to achieve in this particular logic problem, is that I want the cobblestone to be detected. And if specifically cobblestone is here, I want this redstone writer to send a redstone signal, but only if cobblestone is here. So if any other block or no block is in this position, I don't want it to send a redstone signal. So in this particular case, I can go ahead and open the inventory of the block reader. And there is a ton of information here. You notice blue right here represents a Boolean value, which equals true or false. So in this particular state, we can go ahead and we could set our variable card to detect, is there a block here? Is there a block in front of the reader? And in this case, it is set to a value of true. Now that does carry through the network. So because this is attached, it can actually carry that over here. And if I put this to emit a redstone signal, when it is true, it should be emitting a redstone signal. And the best way to see that is by placing a redstone cable here. And we can see that that is true. Now this is the setup in the most simplest form. However, we're missing that variable of what type of block is in front. And so to be able to do that, we would actually need to take our variable card and we would have to work on it just a little bit. So now instead of actually utilizing the has block, if we scroll down through here, we can see that there is some other information that we can actually read or get from the block reader. So if I put this variable on the cobblestone, we're going to see that this has the type set to it and should have a value of cobblestone associated to it. Now, something to keep in mind, that value that it associates is only when it is connected to the network. It actually doesn't hold any value right now, but we can use it inside of a program, and we just need to think of it as potentially having information down the road. So let's cover the basics of the logic programmer, and this is where it does help to have a basic understanding of how coding works. And when I say basic, I mean as basic as possible. You just really need to know what these symbols mean that are inside of this menu. Now, for this particular use case, it is pretty common, and what we're going to need to do is we are going to need to grab a block type to compare to our variable card here. And so to be able to do this, I'm going to select block as the type, and we are going to assign the cobblestone to this variable type. So all I have to do is put cobblestone in that filter. And then when I add this over here, we now have a variable card under the type block that has a value of cobblestone. And what we can do is we can compare these two block types right here to each other to be able to achieve a Boolean or true or false. Now, in this particular case, we're not going to be just selecting the Boolean type. Instead, we need to check if they are equal. And so that is pretty simple. The equals operator, and you can also search equals in here, equals operation in some programming languages is 2 equals. And so all we have to do now is we need to say that something is equal to something else. And in this case, we need to check if the block type is equal to cobblestone. And when those two are equal, we want to send it to this variable card, which is now going to be a Boolean. So now that we have all of those cards, the card that you actually want to place inside of your writer, Redstone writer, is actually going to be the one that is comparing. But once you do this, once you place this card inside of this slot, you're going to notice that it is not working because it says the variables cannot be found. And that is because they're in your inventory. It can't actually come up with variables on its own. So instead, what you need to connect up to it is a variable store. And this is going to house these cards that you just created over here that it's comparing to. And so when we put that inside of our variable store, this now functions. And the reason that it does function is because it is now checking with this card right here, this variable card right here. It is now checking what the information is right now that is in this particular state, and it is actually updating this card as that information changes. And then this card right here stays exactly the same. It is static. So it is then able to use this card to compare to those two variables stored in this variable store. And I hope that's not too confusing, but if we notice, if we change the block, the redstone goes away. If I place any other block in front of this, it doesn't care and will not emit a redstone signal until it is cobblestone, and then it emits a redstone signal. This right here is the basic understanding, or the basic sort of way that integrated dynamics works. Now, of course, this can get much simpler and also much more complicated depending on your skill level when it comes to programming in itself. So now with the complexity of logic programming out of the way with integrated dynamics, we can start to look at integrated tunnels, which in my opinion is a lot more easy to understand. Now with integrated tunnels, you can actually move fluids from one tank to another, you can move energy from one battery to another, and you can also move items from one location to another. So with us jumping into the integrated tunnels, let's talk about the cables. So in all of the different types, whether that is power, whether that's items or fluids, we are going to be utilizing logic cables to connect our connectors. And the connectors in this mod are an interface, and we have an importer, and we also have an exporter. And there's also a filtered version of all of these. But for right now, all we really need to worry about is how an interface works. So the interface is kind of an interesting concept, but consider it basically the controller of the network. And once you have it attached to something, that thing then becomes the source of the network. So in this case, if I wanted to export items out, I would use an exporter. And this exporter would pull from the network, which is now this particular tank. And if I was to put that on here, you notice it is not going to do anything just yet. And then same would go for sending items. So if I wanted to import fluid into this network, I would use my importer to pull fluids from here into here. So how do I actually get these cables to work? Well, by default, there's a ton of variables. So this is why it doesn't work on its own, because you can go ahead in the same way we did just a little bit ago. You could set up your own logic programs to be able to operate these in different ways. But the simplest thing to do is to simply place a card into the export all fluids. And you'll notice all of the fluids just moved from here into here because we were exporting out of the network. Now, if I was to replace this with a importer, you'll notice that it would import all of the fluid from here back into the network. And we can go ahead and simulate that just like so. Now, some things to note about all of these cables is you do have options. So there are different channels, so you can actually set up multiple channels here, and you can have multiple controllers connected to one network, all being controlled by what channel you have defined. And over here, you can change those channel informations depending on what you have selected. So inside of the properties, we can change the channel. So we can have a kind of a complex piping system. We can set it to do different tasks, for example, round robin, where it will kind of pick and choose where it exports. And we can also adjust the transfer rate, or when it comes to power and items, we can adjust that rate as well there. And there's all kinds of other useful information and configs that you can change in these pipes. This mod can get very, very customizable very quickly. Now, just for the sake of showing you, I'm going to go ahead and make sure we set this up. And just to kind of demonstrate that we can change it up, let's say I want my empty battery to be the main network. And if I was to carry my cable over to this power source, I want to make sure that I set this up in a certain way. Now, if this is the main source, we want to import from this into here. So I would use an importer, and then I would connect that up. And then if I went ahead and put this import energy in, we should note that this is now draining that energy over into this battery. And that's just another example. And same goes for items. If I was to, for example, make this the main network, I can then use an exporter to send items from here over to here, or an importer to send items from here to here. It just really depends on what position you have your interface in. And so with this set and an item card in here, I can take any item and I should be able to send it here, and it should be able to work its way over into this barrel, or at least it should, under the export all items. And you see that it has now done this. And there's a lot of customizable things like you see right here. For one, the item transfer rate. You can see there is an item transfer rate that is happening here. And then on this, there is actually a ticks per operation that is very important as well. So it should do an operation every 1 tick. And so this is the fundamentals of how the actual tunnels part kind of work. But there's a lot more to this mod. And that's because it can also interact in world. Now, the in-world interactions kind of can work in a bunch of different ways, but one of them is to actually utilize a world item importer and a world item exporter. And this has the ability to send items from one location to another if set up properly, and can also be controlled. If we just go ahead and do pick up all items and also send all items, and we try to place an item down, Well, notice that it doesn't work at first. And that is because you actually need, for all of these kind of cables or interactions with integrated tunnels, you're actually going to need a inventory for it to actually work from. So it does need a source in the network, and that is where that cable comes in. Because this doesn't have a buffer, you actually need to add said buffer. So in this particular case, now that it has somewhere to send items and to draw from, we can drop items down, and notice it just took that item that I dropped down, technically put it into the inventory, and then this shot it out of the inventory. So I think that's pretty darn cool. And this can be used in a ton of different ways, as you can see here. Now this also works for fluids in world. And we also have the ability to send blocks. So you have an import, and then you also have an export. And this would work the exact same way that we just seen the other ones, except this can utilize blocks. So if I take, for example, a barrel and I place it in front of here, it should take that barrel and then move it over here because it just broke the item, placed it in the storage, and then that ended up getting placed over here. And then last but not least, we have ourselves the player simulator, which can do a lot of functions that we can do. For example, it can right click, it can also left click, and it can use items in different ways. One example is, for example, filling and pulling fluids out of a cauldron. This can definitely do that, and it's very simple to do by just setting the boolean to true. And to do that, we just set our variable card in here. That's going to lock it to true, and it should just be attempting to right click. But you have to give it the item to right click, and for that you have to have yourself a interface connected up to the barrel. So if I put a water bucket in here, this is going to use that water bucket from within this source. So we're going to see that this is going to go empty every time it uses it. And you could definitely set up an instant auto water refilling station by doing this. And it would also work with bottles. And of course, in the settings here under the click, there's a ton of information. So we can have it right click, or we can have it left click, and we can choose the hand that is being clicked with. We also have a continuous click, or if it's sneaking or not. There's all kinds of awesome information, including you down to the detail of where it is actually trying to click. So there's a lot of customizability here. So now that all of the item transfers out of the way, we can actually talk about how we can send this wirelessly as well, because there is a couple of options. One is going to be the Mono-Directional Connector, and this has the ability to connect anything in line of sight. So if it is in line of sight, it will then carry the network signal over here. And you notice that this just worked. It just filled the items from here to here. And this does have a limited range depending on the config, but it can go quite far, and it has to have perfect line of sight. And now when I say line of sight, that doesn't necessarily mean that blocks can't be in between them, because you can have blocks in between the space. And if I was to, for example, put an importer here and then set this, you can see that it still works even though a block is in between them. They just have to be on the same position facing each other. Of course, this also works vertically. Now up next, we have full wireless, which allows us to send cross-dimensionally as well, and that is utilizing an omnidirectional connector. Now, this works in an interesting way. When crafted, these will give you two, and they will be linked in this particular way. But if you ever have two that are not particularly linked, you can go ahead and pull off this omnidirectional connector, and then you can craft the two together to get a group set of 9. For example, this one was set to 9. Every time you craft it, we'll have a different group set. And then we'll go ahead and we'll place these now together. And these should now be connected, and you can see that this now fills up. So you have to keep in mind that the way these link together is how they are crafted inside of a crafting grid. So now that we've gone over some complex topics, some item routing, let's actually talk about the screens and how we can utilize those. And I'm going to show you just an example of one of the really cool things that you can display. And you can utilize a world reader for this, and this is going to read information from our world. It's pretty simple. And all we have to do is place down a screen and then grab ourselves some information from the world reader. And one of those is actually going to be your current TPS in your world, or ticks per second. And so if you start to notice any kind of fluctuations, this would actually represent that. And so if we go ahead and we store that variable here, we can display it on this screen, and you can actually get an in-world representation of your current TPS, or really any information that is on any of these screens should be able to be displayed, including the total time, and so on and so forth. So this is a pretty interesting way of getting information. And there's also some readers that have random number generators. And so there's a lot of different things that you can do with these readers to get information and use it in your logic programs. And now, to save the best for last, let's talk about integrated terminals. Integrated terminals allows you to basically create storage systems for your items. So if you have networks that are set up, you can use this as a storage solution. And to be able to do this, you're going to need to connect to all of your storages these item interfaces. And I believe this will also work for other things, but for right now, if we have all of these connected up, all of these individual inventories, and we place down a storage terminal, this gives us access to all of these inventories. And there's a ton of controls in here. So if I placed all of these items over here, we should see them displayed inside of this after you give it a moment. And there it is. And you can use this with JEI, just like Refined Storage or Applied Energistics, to craft items. Now, if that wasn't simple enough, let me actually show you how easy it is to auto-craft with this solution. And now, to be able to auto-craft, all you're going to need is a crafting table that is connected to a crafting interface. So if I have myself a crafting table in the back here, and I place myself a crafting interface on here, this is going to connect up to my system, and we now have some slots right here that we can place recipes in. Now, to be able to make a recipe for the crafting interface, we need to utilize a logic programmer. Now, this is a portable version of the logic programmer and is basically the same block that we interacted with before. But we can go ahead and do recipe, and we should be able to now define a recipe. For example, let's take some logs, and I want to say, okay, with the logs, I want to be able to turn any sort of log, for example, right here, I want to turn any log into 4 planks and or 4 oak planks. And so we should be able to take any sort of oak and do that. And we define that recipe onto our variable card, just like so. And then we can place that variable card inside of our interface. And once this is done, we now should have the ability to craft some planks. And so if I want to craft 4 planks, I hit next, and I have some logs in my storage, and once done, it has now initiated that craft, and it has crafted. And now the same can actually be done for processing recipes. So if you need to send something into a furnace, what you would do is you could utilize the crafting interface on top of the furnace. And so this should be able to send the ingredients over to here to go ahead and process. And so if we were going to use an exporter, we could export coal out of here, and then down below, we would just need to make sure that our importer can get the items back in. And so to specify a very specific item that needs to be exported, we can just go under the item tab, and we can go ahead and add that item as coal, and then we can set the variable card to the item coal. And this allows us to do export items specifically. And so what we should see is coal is now in that slot. Now on the bottom of this furnace, we definitely want to just export or import all items into our main network. And then of course, for our recipe, we just want to define, in this case, to turn cobblestone into stone, we just want to say send 1 cobblestone, and that is going to equal 1 stone. And then we should be able to store our recipe and place that inside just like this. And so with some cobblestone in here, we should be able to say, hey, I want to craft some stone. So let's craft a couple of them. And then this should now ignite, and it should complete and satisfy the recipe's requests as soon as these items enter back into the main network. And we can actually check on how that information is working by utilizing the job terminal right here. And we can see the status of our crafts. And now to cover some more complexities of the crafter itself, believe it or not, there is a button up here that allows you to do blocking mode, which is actually what it's on right now. But if you turn this off, it should be able to send all of the items for its craft all in one go. But as of right now, it's only going to send one at a time, and it will never send the other one until it has received the prior product, or I should say prior result. Now this video is of course really just covering the basics, and there's a lot of complex things that you can do and use with this mod. So I just want to bear in mind, if there's some awesome folks that have a lot more information than me to tell, please spout that down in the comments section below, as some people may be able to search through that and find that incredibly useful. Just another way to definitely support this community. Now, just for sticking around this far, there is one more thing I do want to show you, as I haven't shown you everything that this mod has to offer, as I do want to still let you guys discover some new things. But this right here is a effect writer, and what it has the ability to do, once you define a double, which is just a variable that's going to define its velocity. So if we set it to, for example, 0.05, we can go ahead and write any of these effects, and it will actually display particles, and you can configure those as much as you want. And there's a lot of really, really cool ones. For example, how about the Elder Guardian constantly rotating in your face? Yes, because you can do that, and it is very, very funny, and could also be a funny way to troll your friends. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and hopefully you'll learn something new. Of course, like I said, comment down below and click the subscribe button if this kind of content is something that you enjoy watching. And, well, be sure to give this video a huge thumbs up, as you gotta, well, let that YouTube algorithm know that you enjoy these videos. And of course, I will see you in the next one, and as always, thanks for watching. Bye!